So again, welcome. Our topic for today is relationships. And it's funny, when we say relationships, a lot of times people think about romantic relationships, marriage, partnership. And really it's so much broader than that. And I think we all know that. Relationship is with anybody. And what we're going to share today, I think, really applies to our spouses, romantic partners, but also our children, our colleagues, our friends, our extended family. It's, any humans that we're in relationship with. This all really applies. So where I really wanted to get started is to tackle head on what I see as a fallacy or a misunderstanding about relationships. We hear so many messages about how relationships inevitably change over time. And what this might look like is, a great example is that there's a message we often hear that there are cycles or certain predictable patterns in a marriage. That there might be first the honeymoon phase, well, I guess first falling in love, and then a honeymoon phase where you're in that blissed out state. And that somehow we get the message that inevitably that goes into some other phase where we start to disagree and conflict comes up. And that then there's the phase of sort of facing that and working on conflict. And maybe if we're lucky, we come out of that. And I think maybe that's probably recognizable narrative to many of us. But there are other misunderstandings and fallacies that aren't as obvious or as talked about. I think we could all recognize that if someone said to us, well, of course you don't feel about your 18-year-old the way you might have the moment they put him in your arms for the first time. I think we'd all say, well, of course. Well, what I really want to tackle is not of course. I don't think there's anything necessary or obvious about that at all in any of our relationships. And here's why. Is that the way I really see it is that we're creating our experience from the inside. Whatever we're experiencing is not a reflection of what's happening outside of us. Now, that'll sound really familiar to many of you who have been our clients and who have heard of this inside-out nature of our experience. But I want to go a little bit deeper and really talk about the inside part. So if we're creating our experience from the inside out, when we look at the inside part of it, our inner worlds, if you will, we really have two different inner worlds in a sense. We have an inner world that we create with our conceptual mind. And that world is the world where there's all the evaluating and judging and analyzing and comparing. And generally speaking, when we're in that inner world is where we take things personally, where we find the people we're in relationship with lacking in some way. We find ourselves lacking in some way. It's where dissatisfaction lives. And it's where distance lives. When we're in that part of ourselves, that thinking part, we're generally very attached to our concepts about the past and our concepts of who the person in front of us is and their shortcomings, of course. But the part that I think is remarkable to me that people don't talk about as often as we should is that that's not the only inner world available to us. We have a whole other deeper inner world beyond our conceptual mind, beyond thinking. And when we drop into that, it's like dropping out of all of our thinking, letting go, being fully present right now in this sense of spaciousness and quiet that's available to all of us under all our thinking. That in that world, there's really only one thing that's possible, and that's a feeling of warmth and connection. In that world, the past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. And without the past and the future, and without judging and analyzing and comparing and doing all that stuff that we do with our thinking minds, we naturally fall into this feeling of warmth, this feeling of well-being, this feeling of compassion and connection for whoever is in front of us. And so what I want to point to about this is what I call the connection reboot. And what this means is that in any relationship, no matter the history, no matter what's happened, no matter what's been said, when we drop in to that other, that deeper inner world, there's an instant reboot. It's almost like the slate gets wiped clean. It doesn't matter what our stories are about the past. We can instantly feel about our 18-year-old just the way we did when they were this just precious little infant. That there's nothing between us and that feeling other than a whole pile of stories that we've accumulated over time. And when we drop out of those stories, we can feel just that warmth. And that with our spouses or our partners, that same connection reboot is available to us, and most people don't realize it. And that it's not hard work, and it's not somewhere in the future, and it's not on the other side of lots of process and lots of talking. That is actually instant. The moment we fall out of our thinking into that other world that we have access to, that other inner world, we can feel just the way we did when we fell in love with our partner. And that can happen as many times as we like. That feeling is ours to have. And so when it comes to relationships, I know that for me, knowing that I have a reboot available is incredibly freeing and incredibly powerful. It just means to me that whatever I'm experiencing if I'm caught up in my thinking, caught up in my stories, is irrelevant in a sense. I can just ignore that and drop into this other part and have that connection reboot and move from that feeling, from the connection that comes from that place. That I don't have to listen to the noise that gets in between the person in front of me and my own sense of feeling of love for them. I don't have to listen to the static that gets in the way. And I know I can have faith that even if it's not happening right in this moment, that connection reboot is available. And it's incredibly powerful. And it means we can see the people around us with fresh eyes and with just as much of a feeling of connection and unbelievable warmth and newness, in a sense, as we did the first time we became friends with them or fell in love with them or brought them into this world, whatever it might be. So on that note, I would love to turn it over to Jason and have him share what he's seeing about all this. And then we'll take it from there. Jason, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Thanks, Sumaya. And thanks for framing it in that beautiful way. What I wanted to share, I suppose, is in a sense, how this shows up for me, a very practical take on it, on what I see as kind of the most important part of successful relationships. And again, I'm going to be talking about, me and my partner, in this case, Sumaya, but I really think its applications are to any relationship. And so just this morning, I read from a colleague of ours, a great metaphor that she was offering up, that in this case had to do with Facebook. And it made me chuckle a little bit because Sumaya and I have had these conversations in our house where she says to me, how come you're getting all this cool stuff on your Facebook feed and how do I get it on mine? And I was just saying to her, well, it's a matter of, what I'm liking and opening and reading, and the algorithm that Facebook has devised kind of learns what I like and gives me more of that. And so what, in the case of Facebook, what I saw was that it helps to understand how it works so that you can have the experience that you're really looking for. And when you don't understand how it works, well, then your experience seems less in your control. It seems a bit more random. It seems puzzling at times. And so that to me looks so much like what I understand to be the truth of relationships, in terms of when we understand, in this case, not so much the algorithm behind relationships, but how we work as human beings, then it really gives us the experience we're looking for in relationships. So, I've really loved that over the last 16 years, and I'd say really intensely over the last 5 years, I've felt more in love with my wife than ever before. And I've been curious about, well, why is that? And I think for me, what Sumaya was talking about in terms of falling out of our thinking and seeing each other fresh and having that newness show up in the moment has everything to do with understanding how it works. So for me, this idea that as I think back on, so what have I been doing the last 5 years that has made this relationship feel so rich and so alive, so fresh, and for me to feel so much love for Sumaya. And I feel like it's not unlike the Facebook situation, where if I understand how our minds work and that every single one of us has our low moods or less clear thinking, and we all go up and down, and we all have our really clear moments and connected moments. And that if I know that I don't really need to trust or invest a lot of meaning in those cloudier moments of thought, then the same thing is true for Sumaya. And I don't need to really put a lot of meaning in her low moments either. So it's as if I'm just sort of scrolling right by those low quality moments and not really giving them much thought, much credence, much time of day. And then there are these other moments that are clearer, that are much more interesting to me, that draw me in. I can look at Sumaya and I can see all these beautiful qualities she has. And so it's as if I'm liking those or reading those or, hanging out with those. And then, the algorithm of life says, oh, well, we'll give him more of that. And so I've spent more and more time being served up these moments of connection and warmth and clarity and seeing Sumaya in a certain way. And far, far fewer moments, sometimes hardly any at all, where I'm really seeing her through those cloudier lenses. And when I do, they just, Sumaya, because she extends the same goodwill to me, those moments pass so much more quickly. And so I just love that metaphor that over time, the algorithm of life, the algorithm of our own wisdom just keeps serving up more and more of that good stuff that I really cherish. And so while that's how my experience of Sumaya, I would say that's also my experience of my kids. And that's also my experience of my brothers. That's also my experience of people that I get to work with. That's also my experience of people who I used to work with. And I don't think there's any special category. I think when we understand that that's how it works in relationships, then we get to just enjoy our what should we call it? Our life feed. So that's what I wanted to share with you all today. Thanks.
Thanks, Jason. I'd love to piggyback on that. I'm loving so many things about that metaphor. I love the fact that, yeah, there's an algorithm and you get more of what you like and what you put your attention on. But that doesn't mean that your whole feed is only that stuff. There's still stuff you want to scroll by. There's still going to be the content that you don't really enjoy and you can just ignore it. It doesn't mean that goes away. And I love that part of the metaphor because that's exactly how it works. It doesn't mean we don't have low stretches where we have really low quality thinking and we think crummy things about our partner or our kid, or we get frustrated, we get angry, we get, really get caught up. And I love that. I really, the metaphor is just so apt that, yeah, those things come and you can just sort of scroll through. And the question ends up being, well, what do you really want to choose? What do you want to click on? What actually matters? What draws you in? What do you care about? And whatever it is you put your attention on, that's what's going to grow. That's what you're going to get more of. I love that. I absolutely love that. It's great.
Yeah, and in my real world experience of Facebook, I often will consider the source, right? And there'll be things in my feed that I'll just know either, boy, I really love and appreciate that source, so I'm gonna check it out. And there are other sources that I say, no, I'll just roll on by. And so in my life with my own thinking, if I can see that sometimes the source is, really untrustworthy, I'm really, I've got a really busy mind or really cloudy mind right now, well then I can just scroll right on by those thoughts.
Yeah, I really love that. So there was one other layer I would love to add to all of that, which is there's an additional mysterious piece that I think is such a beautiful part of why the clicking on or the opening of the stuff that we like, why that's so powerful. And that is, as I was describing, that we really, if we pay attention to our inner landscape, that there's this profoundly quiet place beyond all of our thinking, where all the best stuff lives, where the deepest connection really lives. That's where it comes from. And we have to, we have to have a relationship with our thinking where we see that our thinking is not the only choice, that we can scroll by that to something deeper. But the part that's so amazing is what happens when we're in that space? What happens when we click and say yes to a feeling of warmth and connection, no matter what's happening? And I guess what I'd want to share is I've been blown away these last number of years by the effect that being in that feeling of warmth, no matter what the circumstances, the effect that has on the people around me. And what I mean by that is that feeling that radiates from me when I'm hanging out in that feeling of warmth and connection is more powerful than any words or actions I could come up with. That no matter what's happening, if I can drop into that space, something in what's happening in the relationship seems to inevitably shift. I first learned this really powerfully with my horses. As many of you know, I coach with horses, so I spend lots of time out there with them. And I just would see it over and over again in myself and in the people I was working with my clients. That the moment that a human drops out of their thinking and into a more open, more compassionate, more loving space, the horses would be instantly drawn in. Like they almost couldn't help it. They'd have to be near it because it was such a beautiful feeling. They wanted to be near it. They wanted to be close by. And it turns out, remarkably, that humans work just the same way. We're not often conscious of it, or others aren't conscious of it, but it really is how it works. And so what's been the gift of that is that, for example, if I'm struggling with something related to one of our teenagers, and I'm really caught up in some kind of a story about how they're not meeting my expectations, or they're going down the wrong road, or gosh darn it, they're not being responsible, or whatever it might be that we inevitably do, because that we're human, and that's just part of what's on the menu. That when I'm in that space, no matter what words I cook up, no matter what conversation I think of having in that moment, inevitably fuels more disconnection, and it just feels crummy. And then I've seen over and over that the moment I just let go of my grip and recognize that there's no real truth to all those stories in my head, that I can just let go of those and drop into that warmer feeling, that feeling of connection, and just hang out in that. Next thing I know, like magic, something shifts. They come up and want to be close. They initiate a conversation, or lo and behold, they do the thing that I was all upset they weren't doing. You know, something pretty magical happens when we're willing to explore that space and trust that it is more powerful than anything else we could cook up. That it is just like, it is, as I said before, I think of it as the connection reboot, you know, the relationship reboot. It just seems to reset things and shift whatever is happening in the most beautiful and mysterious way. And it's happened so many times. And the first few times that, you know, I really saw the effect of it, I was blown away. And some part of me is like, no, come on. It couldn't possibly be. I just can't possibly work that way. And then it happened another time, and it would happen another time, and it would happen another time, until now I just have such a bedrock trust that in that reboot, in touching that space where my heart opens up and I'm not so tense and caught up, and that touches, you know, the person that I'm in the conflict with or struggling around, more than anything else. And I've loved learning that, because it has kind of changed everything. Frankly. And Jason, I can tell you'd love to jump in on that one.
That's true. Thanks. Well, just it reminded me of what you just shared. It actually reminded me of a conversation I had with a business client that I found fascinating. And the nature of the conversation was, hey, I'm the CEO, and it's my responsibility to evaluate the people who work for me. And aren't I supposed to give them, you know, all this thorough feedback? And I said, well, let's play around. What would it be like if you just found that good feeling for the person and just shared with them what you think you really appreciate and that they're really doing well? And what ended up happening was, first of all, that person said, really, can I do that? You know, is that okay? And I said, well, you're the boss. You can set the rules. So she tried it. And what ended up happening was that feeling that you're talking about, operating from that feeling, was far more important than the details of how to evaluate the people that work for her. And she ended up seeing that the response was so wonderful. So the engagement, the appreciation, the surprise, that it wasn't about, well, we need to balance out, you know, the good stuff with what you really need to work on. And instead it was operating from that understanding that it's not the content of what we say to one another, it's the feeling we're coming from. So that created more connection, more relationship, more openness in an environment, in a relationship that's not an intimate one. And so what you and I are sharing, Sumaya, is not limited to intimate relationships. It's about all human relationships. And that when we just experiment, explore, play around with, you know, what's it like to, we can have the thinking, but to not, like you said, to not mistake that there's some truth in it, that's just what we do. We generate lots of thinking, and when we can have both that thinking and an understanding that the feeling between us is the most important thing, then we can, we have a lot more freedom in how we interact with anybody in any relationship.
Yeah, Jason, what I'd love to share that occurs to me is sort of two different examples two additional examples of how I've experienced this. And the one that's maybe surprised me the most is how what we're describing and this feeling that one can be in, this feeling that's out of judgment, basically, out of our stories about other people, what's underneath that's in play with complete strangers. And I've been really blown away to experience what it's like to go through an hour of, errands or 2 hours of errands in town when I'm in that feeling. When I'm in that feeling of openness where I'm not in my own head, judging and criticizing and belittling and whatever else we do as humans, because it's just the deal sometimes. But when I'm in that quiet place and I'm feeling really loving, I just can't believe what comes back my way. Whether it's the teller at the bank, the sweet young gal at the grocery store, a random stranger passing me by on the street, or whatever it might be, anybody I come in contact with, there's just a completely different quality to how they respond to me. And I have to say, it just makes for sort of beautiful experiences, beautiful, ordinary, mundane, everyday experiences with anybody I come in contact with, even if it's for a minute or less, and it's someone I'll never see again. And it in the end, it's universal. It doesn't matter who's around you. It's like, that's what the horses have shown me is there's a feeling that radiates out that people can perceive whether they're conscious of it or not. And it invites them into a nicer feeling. And then you walk through your day with this just surprising feeling of goodwill and connection. I've just absolutely loved experiencing that. But there was another example I wanted to share before we open it up to questions and comments. And that is somewhere in between the really intimate and the total strangers. And the example was pretty recent for me in this last number of months, where I went through a period where, with my youngest brother, who's maybe 10 years younger than I am and lives overseas, we'd had a period of really beautiful connection earlier in the summer, and kind of a newfound connection and newfound understanding, some of which was really about this paradigm that Jason and I share with clients. And I concocted a story in my head. Well, now things are different, and the patterns of the past are going to be like that. And he's not going to do some of the same things he's done in the past. And I just created an expectation in my head that was, I made up. And so then he kind of disappeared for a while and didn't really communicate what was happening, didn't really let me know why. It was sort of an old pattern, that something he'd done in the past quite a number of times. And I went into a full-blown reaction. Talk about not being in the feeling. That inner world where you're thinking and judging and evaluating everything, that's exactly where I was hanging out. And I, of course, predictably felt frustrated and angry. And I did nothing about it. I just watched it for almost 2 months. So this was not a quick, I could not find the reboot. I just couldn't find that until I did. And the moment I found the reboot, the moment I dropped away and I came back to a nice feeling, I picked up the phone and called him. And we had the most beautiful conversation. I was able to describe to him without any criticism what I had the shitstorm of thought that I'd been in, basically, and that's just what it was, and I had waited for it to pass, and then now I really wanted to start back up, and he received it so beautifully, and he apologized, and of course it wasn't at all what he intended, and the feeling spoke for itself, and the outcome was just beautiful. I think we could both say, if he was on this call, I think he would say that too, and I trusted that there was absolutely no point interacting until the feeling came back. The feeling of love and connection came back. And when it did, then I was able to reconnect with him in a way that kept us moving, staying connected rather than pulling us apart and creating distance. And so that's just another example of how the feeling we're in is the most important ingredient, the most important variable, with a stranger, with a close, an intimate relationship, with our children, with distant family, with absolutely any human being. That's the magic sauce, if you will, is what feeling are we in? And if we're in a contracted feeling and really believing our thinking, best to lean away from that and just scroll past it. And when we're in a beautiful, loving feeling, we can enjoy it. We can, it's from that place that we can also have more difficult conversations, and that feeling will carry the day in a sense. So. Jason, did you want to add anything else before we open it up for questions?
No, I'd love to hear if there are questions.
Okay. So we'd love to hear from you. I know that all of you have turned off your video, which is fine. But if you did want to jump in with either something that's occurred to you as we've been sharing, or a question, or an experience you've had, any of those things, we'd really love to hear from you. If you did want to turn on your video for that part, we would love that too, but it's not a requirement. And the easiest thing is basically to just unmute yourself and jump right in and ask us your question, or share with us your comment or your experience. We would absolutely love to hear from you.
I'll be your Huckleberry.
Hi, Ben.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Thank you for sharing. That was wonderful. I guess my question is, you talk about being in that place where you're not considering the past and the present, but obviously we are human and human nature in the sense that, we come home with all the stresses of our day, and then our wife or spouse starts unloading on us, and we haven't had the time to decompress. How do you get yourself in that space to have that moment and have those feelings when you're not in that space, I guess, and flip that switch to be more present, be that loving, caring person, and receive what they're saying, even if it is negative, and stay positive?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Sumaya, do you want to share? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably both can really, really relate, and maybe each of us can take a stab at how we each see that. And, Ben, your question is so understandable, because there is no way we stay in a good feeling all the time. It is simply what it means to be human, that our experience is always fluctuating. So, what I would want to share is that I can't always access that feeling. And I don't know that any of us can. So when I'm in a really crummy feeling and I know it, the critical ingredient is awareness. For me, in a sense, as soon as there's a contraction where I know I'm tired, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, there's a very distinct feeling that comes with that. And it's kind of the opposite of expansive. I almost have a red flag that goes up. That's like, uh-oh, watch out. Whatever's going to come from it isn't going to be loving. It's not going to be very expansive. And all that flag tells me is, just don't choose this moment to engage. Don't believe your thinking. In fact, quite the opposite. Be as skeptical as you can be of your thinking. Just know that whatever I'm experiencing in that moment is going to be flavored by that tension. It's inevitable. And I don't have to do anything about it. I don't have to push myself to experience something different. It's just what it is. And so how that looks for me and Jason is that, I'll often be really verbal about that. I'll really communicate with him. I have my little phrases. Tired thinking. Oh my God, dark glasses. It is dark in here. I'll just be really clear that I am in a dark space. I even sometimes say to Jason, please, if I do make the mistake of saying anything out loud, please don't believe anything I say right now. Don't take anything I say seriously. I'm going to, it's going to pass. I'm going to come out of it. And, and I'll do whatever I need to negotiate it as gracefully as I can without going deeper into the rabbit hole. That might look like just being really honest and saying, hey, I'm super tired and overwhelmed. Everything looks really gray. I'm just going to take a little walk. I know it'll, I hope it'll shift, and, and I'll be right back, or whatever it might be. And often Jason will, if, you know, one of us will suggest something like that to the other. Like without the, like, well, you sure seem to be in a dark place. Why don't you take a walk? Not that kind, but more like, you know, I totally get it. It's clearly been a long day, and you know, what can I do for you? Do you want to put your feet up here? Why don't I take care of dinner tonight? Whatever it might be, if one of us is recognizing that the other is in a dark space, we just try to be compassionate and do whatever we need to you know, to extend support rather than judgment about it, and that can often really help as well.
And what I want to add, Ben, is that Sumaya and I both have had conversations with our clients that sound something like this. You know, I'm learning about this inside out understanding, and I come home and my partner really wants to get into it. And I no longer see the value in that, and they take it the wrong way. And now they're really frustrated with me. So what should I do? Right? And that conversation is a great one because we get to stay in that conversation with the clients. What we end up seeing and hearing is, well, their own wisdom gives them an idea of what to do. And it's different for everybody, and it's different every time. Sometimes it's, you know, I just go to my room. Sometimes it's, you know, I go for a walk. Sometimes it's, got into it with, you know, it's a little different every time. But what happens is over time, there's this rising tide effect that, to me, I guess, to mix metaphors, it's like this bank account where, you know, not having that awareness that Sumaya was describing of the state of mind that you're in, you're just that much less interested in having the argument in you know, because you see where you are and you know that whatever's going to come out of my mouth probably isn't worth much right now. And over time, you're just making fewer withdrawals on the goodwill account, you know, with you and your partner. And the fewer withdrawals, well, the more there's still in there, you know, the more goodwill there is between the two of you. And that's what we see is over time, you figure it out for yourself. And, you know, we certainly have experiences from our own life to share, but the most important thing of all is that when you see there's not a lot of value in speaking, acting from a low place, you'll figure out what to do. And over time, it gets easier and easier. And then the partner who initially was resentful starts to appreciate that and starts to meet you where you are rather than you sinking down to that lower level.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Ben. Really appreciate it. DK, I noticed earlier that you had turned on your video. Did you have a question that you want to hop on?
I'm at a restaurant right now, so I apologize if there's a lot of background noise. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Um,
I'm just glad you joined us.
I'm too. So I initially, when I saw that this was about relationships, I didn't want to join because I'm going through a really nasty divorce right now and trying to figure out how to navigate that. But it was more about how do I navigate relationships with other people outside of romantic relationships, like with my family. And so I was excited to hear that that was part of the conversation. But when there's really ugly stuff being slung back and forth, how do you stay in the present moment, and how do you stay in that space of being and keeping the upper hand, or not the upper hand, but like of keeping your presence about you instead of going down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, thanks, TK. That's a great question. And I'm sorry that things are tough. I'm super grateful that you jumped on our call and that you asked the question. You know, what occurs to me about that it's really, there's only one thing that is kind of my saving grace, my lifesaver when things get that way. And that is that I know that I have two possible inner experiences about it. And when I'm in sort of the personal experience, if you will, of my conceptual mind, my own personal experience, that all of those things are going to look really true and really real. And therefore, I'm going to take them personally and they're going to hurt. And I'm going to get caught up in a storm of really strong emotional reaction about that. And that's going to happen because relationships can get messy. But the saving grace for me is knowing that when I'm caught up in those feelings, all that's really telling me is that I'm in my personal thinking and that I'm believing that thinking. And I'm believing that the things are being said about me or the stuff that's being slung, that there's truth to that. And it's okay if I'm doing that. And it's okay if that comes with big feelings. But as long as I understand that that's what's happening, that I'm just believing, thinking that, that isn't necessary for me to believe, that's not the only option, then eventually I'll drop in and access something different. So like, I know that if you went out right now and were with your horse and you let all that fall away and you were just totally present, none of that would look alive and present and true to you. It would just melt away. And you would just be there with Meadow, connecting, and the world would just be that experience. And that is that deeper world. That's where that stuff isn't real, where we just scroll past it. And in a sense, it's inevitable that we're going to experience both those things. But that anytime we can touch that quiet space where all of that messy thinking no longer looks so true, we get, it's like, that's the recharge station. We don't have to live there because we can't, because that would be saying like, I'm just not going to be human anymore. But anytime you can touch that, fall out of all that stuff, touch that quiet space, you'll get a burst of energy that will then take you to the next, whatever comes next. It is your home base. It is what feeds you. Even if it's a second, 2 seconds, it doesn't matter, a minute, 5 minutes, anytime you drop for a second into that space, it will feed you. It'll feed your soul in a sense. And that will keep you in balance. And then it's okay. You go back to believing the thinking and it looks huge and the emotions come. And riding that, as long as we don't stay only in that place where all the thinking looks true and the emotions are really intense, if we do cycle, it gets more and more intense and more intense. It's like a snowball, and that gets really overwhelming. So we just have to be able to drop in, recharge. Okay, drop in, recharge, and just keep touching that space anytime it feels available to us. And feed that part of ourselves that knows that there's no truth in all that stuff being slung. Jason, is there anything you want to add?
That was beautifully put. Yes, the only thing I'd want to add is that the picture of what you shared is so helpful. I wouldn't want people to misunderstand that the goal is to, not be bowled over, not have the powerful feelings. What it reminded me of is a conversation I had with a client who was having suicidal thinking. And he was surprised when I shared with him that it was okay for that thought to come back around as long as he saw it for what it was. And that he could also see that every time he had that thought, as his state of mind shifted, he had a different experience and that thought left. And so it's more the understanding that you're talking about that gives us hope in those moments. It's not that we need to never have the powerful experience of being bowled over, but when we're having that experience of being bowled over, we can still live in a feeling of hopefulness that we're not, this isn't a permanent thing, and that we're not doing anything wrong, and that the hopefulness comes from knowing that this is temporary and that we have access to that place that you were describing, Sumaya.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. That's super helpful. Yeah. DK, is that helpful? Did that help answer a little? Great. Well, thank you for the question. Is there anybody else who'd like to jump in with a question or a story or a comment?
I thought I saw Monica pop in there for a moment. Monica, do you have something to share? Maybe not.
Yes.
Oh, I had a follow up for I guess the experience of showing our spouses or someone else in a relationship that we're not in a good place, and not having them or vice versa when they express that to us take it personally. I think that's where I really struggle. It's like how I to disconnect my personal feeling of responsibility or just empathy, strong empathy, and let them be in that place without just feeling terrible about it, and then vice versa.
Thanks, Ryan. Well, if I understand what you're asking about, it sounds to me like you see that you see a connection between, your partner or someone else's experience and what's going on for you. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think so. I basically, like, so say you're in we got small children, someone's all of a sudden feeling overwhelmed and in a place where, like you said, nothing good's going to come out of my mouth, safety word comes out or whatever. It's inevitable that if say that's happening with my spouse, that I all of a sudden feel responsible, or just that I need to fix it and come down, then my level gets brought down to where it didn't need to be. And I guess when I say vice versa, that could happen. I think it happens with both of us. So I was trying to see if you have any suggestions of techniques or ways that we could let each other be in that space without taking it personally. I don't know how else to, I'm sure that's the right word. But.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's a really helpful clarification. And it's, boy, such an understandable question, especially, when it's someone that we cherish. We don't, none of us likes to see someone we cherish, in a low place. And I would say what's been so helpful for me to see is that if it's true for not just me, but for every human being, that by design, we have the full range. And that means that, these sort of busy-minded, cloudy, low mood experiences of life, well, we all signed up for that. We didn't just sign up for the lovely parts. And so if that's true for everybody, and you can see that happens to you sometimes, well, then that happens to the people we love too. And those moments, the way it's built into us is that they pass all on their own. And so I could really relate to your question, because I used to really want to fix Sumaya when she was having a low mood experience. And that, at that time, that's what made sense to me. Like, I could really help you here. Let me do something. Let me get in there, and I remember quite vividly, there was a moment in our relationship when Sumaya basically said to me, why is it that you get to have your low experiences, but I don't? And Ryan, that kind of blew things wide open for me, because I realized that there was no avoiding, for me, the having of those low experiences. And I knew that, and I know I always pop out of it. I always come back. And the way Sumaya phrased her question, it made me stop and think, wow, why aren't I seeing that Sumaya is no different than any other human being? She's going to have her low moments too. And just like anyone else, they're going to pass. And when I saw that, I stopped worrying about it, and I stopped seeing it as a problem. And I definitely didn't think it was something to be fixed anymore. And sure enough, when I stopped putting that kind of pressure, as Sumaya was saying before, my feeling changed. I no longer wanted a different person in front of me. I was now so much more okay with her low mood experience, and she felt that for me. And lo and behold, you know, Sumaya can tell you if this is her experience, but my experience was, it looked to me like it passed more quickly because I wasn't putting pressure on her. I wasn't hoping she would be different. I was just saying, yeah, that's the way we operate. We all have our low moods. So.
Yeah, I would love to add to that. Ryan, thank you for the question. I think it's something that we all struggle with and can absolutely relate to. I think there are a couple things I want to add to what Jason shared. And that is the part about how to not take it personally. Like if someone, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but I heard partly in your question, I heard, well, if your spouse is in a really low place and then says things or does things from that place, it's hard not to take them personally sometimes. And the thing that's been really transformative for me about that is if I understand my own experience and I'm really aware of my own experience, what that means is I'm really aware that when I am in a crummy place and I'm really caught up in thought, man, I can cook up some crazy thinking about just about anything, including Jason. And I'm so clear that there's no truth. I don't actually believe those things at all. They're simply a symptom of my being caught up in my thinking.
Yeah, I guess it's really two situations. Even if nothing nasty is said, and they, I guess use dark glasses or whatever works. Like even just knowing that that's occurring inside of them could even, I feel like that would even, we're so like in tune with each other that all of a sudden we're devastated that they feel that way. And to both of your points, it's like, well, that's going to happen. So why, well, you know, don't need to get both of us to that place. But I think just trying to think of if there's techniques or something to get there.
You know, thank you, Ryan. That really helps. That really, really helps. My short answer is I don't think it's ever about technique. I think it's about our depth of understanding. Because here's what happens. When we really see how it all works and we really see how we're creating our experience moment to moment and how it fluctuates, the key thing that happens is it no longer means anything. So if Jason's in a low mood, I don't think that means anything other than he's in a low place. If I get upset about it, all that means is I'm making it mean something. And I'm just making that up too. When I start to see that the ups and the downs, all of that, there's no inherent meaning to any of it. That, you know, any meaning that I put on it, I'm just truly making something up out of nothing. Then it really loses its power. Bottom line is the understanding means that it no longer makes any sense to me. If I'm in a reaction about Jason being in a low place, I kind of look inward and go, well, that doesn't make any sense. What am I making this mean? And then I realize, well, it doesn't mean anything other than he's just tired and stressed or whatever. And it just loses its power. It doesn't, you know, if it has no meaning, no inherent meaning, well, then there's nothing to be done about it. And I know that that has to be true because I know that when I'm in a low place, it doesn't mean anything, which is why I can say to Jason, please just do not take any of this personally or seriously, because it's nothing but tired thinking, or, you know, whatever, just end of the day, whatever it might be. So if it doesn't mean anything about, you know, when I'm in it, why would it mean anything when he's in it? And that alone is really freeing. It's like, oh, well, I don't have to take any of it seriously in myself or in anybody else. And if I do, all that means is I'm caught up too. Oh, well, that'll pass too.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really, yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so, but I'm an extremely emotional being, and I feel my feelings like so strong. And so when something like that happens to me, it's visceral, and I don't know how to do that. So that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, thanks, TK. I appreciate that. You know, but I guess what I would add in response to your question, DK, is that I used to think that depth of emotion, reaction, I don't mean emotion like love and connection. I mean the reaction to something happening, the contracted kind of emotion, that the stronger it was, the more it meant, or the more it meant about me, or the more it meant that's just who I am. And I've come to see that the stronger the reaction means one thing and one thing only. I'm believing my thinking more. I'm more in the rabbit hole of believing what this means, what I'm making it up, you know, what the meaning I'm making of it. And that's fine. I mean, I can have huge reactions. Gosh, I mean, I can have shit storms of thought and be sobbing. And while I'm sobbing to Jason about whatever the shitstorm is, I'm sobbing, don't believe a thing I'm saying. It's okay. It's going to pass. I don't actually believe it. I'm just feeling it really strongly right now. And he doesn't think that's a problem. And I don't think that's a problem. But I don't think just because I'm having such a powerful reaction that anything is more true or anything is more real or it means anything. It just means that's just how I'm feeling. Okay. It'll pass like everything else. It just doesn't mean much, and that's not a problem. You know, feeling more, you still work just like everyone, you know, anyone else. Like I haven't had Jason have a full sobbing fit about the shitstorm of thinking that I've had, but I don't think that means I'm somehow broken or worse. It's just what I've, you know. So if you can be okay with that, you know, if we can be okay, the combination of understanding and being okay with the experience means you just flow with it. You know, we make meaning out of stuff. It gives us strong emotions. We feel them, and then they pass, and then we feel something different, and then okay. That's the beautiful messiness of what it means to be human, and we can ride the wave instead of thinking that we can stop a big wave or fight it. It's like, well, no, it's just going to come through and bowl us over, and then we're going to get back up. And it doesn't mean a whole ton. It's okay. It really is.
Yeah, and one of the most helpful things for me, DK, was when I really let it in that I don't have any control over what pops into my head. You know, now once it's in my head, well, then I have the option to bring awareness, you know, like Sumaya was saying, like, oh man, this feels really big, you know, but I don't have control over what pops into my head. So to me, it's kind of like, I just love my little toy Weeble, right? That I may have mentioned to you in the past, these little toy Weebles that wobble, but by design, they always come back. So I might have a thought or an experience that makes me wobble. But when I know in every fiber of my being that I will come back, that the wobble is part of the design and the coming back to center is part of the design, then I am not frightened by the wobble. The wobble now looks like, oh, well, I'm not saying I love this part of the human experience, but it is part of the human experience. And I wobble all the time. And I wobbled just last week, and Sumaya, was really graceful with me and said, "Oh, you're just making a lot of meaning out of your thinking." And I was like, "Oh, holy cow." And I popped out of it. But I had a pretty big wobble. But it didn't freak me out, because I get that that's just the way we work.
Thanks, Jason. And thank you again, DK, for your questions. Really appreciate it. We're just about out of time, although I did want to open it up if there was somebody who was really hoping to ask one last question. Jason, does that work for you, to keep it open for one more question? If there was, a question or a sharing that someone was really wanting to do, this would be great. And if not, we can wrap it up. And if there is, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump right in. Okay, perfect. Then it's just the right time to wrap it up. I just really want to say thank you to all of you. It's really not only a joy, but also an honor to have you join us, take this time out of the middle of your day to spend with us, and really love the questions that you brought to us, and love the opportunity to connect. So thank you all. And as always, we'll have another webinar next month. We will send out the topic and all the details in our newsletter, and the recording for this one, if there's anyone who would really benefit from hearing some of this, the recording will be on our website, and we will also send the link to that recording with our next newsletter. And of course, we're always be happy to follow up on these conversations if there's more you'd like to explore. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.